Hey guys, this is Solution Podfic, and today we're going to be reading I Didn't Ask to Die by I Needed Supervision. This is Chapter 10. Even before the dogs bark, Peter senses his alone time getting interrupted. He hears the bell of the entrance door and the voices of Diana and a man despite the 3 doors between them. You're a good girl, aren't you? He glances down at the dog. He uses his lap as a pillow. Lucy's head rests heavily on his leg. The feeling of pins and needles in his lower body changes into numbness, and Peter knew it would hurt to get up after sitting on the ground for so long. Running his fingers through Lucy's fur, feeling the warmth reminds him that it was worth it. The movement of his hand grows slower. Lucy has her eyes closed, lax in his lap. She's either asleep or dozing. Whenever Peter had met her outside, she loved sunbathing on her orange worn-out blanket, gazing lazily at the people walking past. I'm sorry you can't go outside at the moment. Lucy's head grows blurry and Peter blinks, hastily wiping his eyes. The white of her bandages is blinding and he quickly averts his eyes, feeling the lump in his throat growing just looking at them. He continues petting the dog's head until the sound of an incoming message catches his attention. The lump in his throat grew heavier as Peter had a hunch who was messaging him. After school, he had come directly to the shelter. May had probably arrived at their apartment by now, asking where he was. With a heavy heart, Peter let his head fall back against the pale yellow-colored concrete wall, staring at the ceiling. Yesterday had been terrible. 22 hours before. Please, Aunt May, you can't do this. I've almost got the money together. Peter stands before his aunt, his arms full of half-washed clothes, steadily dripping a mixture of water and foaming laundry detergent onto the floor. May shakes her head unperturbed. Peter, you're 15. You will not be working, especially not several jobs at once. School comes first. The teenager barely keeps from rolling his eyes at the argument. My grades didn't drop once. I studied just as much as before. When I get the money together, I'll quit all the jobs, I promise. May sighs. She knew her nephew was right. She would never have guessed from his grades what Peter was up to while she was at work. He had his homework and assignments finished on time, and there was not one failed test or a decline in his grades. A slight pressure behind her eyes adumbrates an impending migraine. When she got home from a late shift, May hadn't expected to catch her nephew pulling out not one but several uniforms out of the washing machine and trying to hide the wet clothes from her. The moment Peter caught sight of her standing in the bathroom door, he resembled a deer caught in the headlights. He stood there frozen, brown eyes wide with shock. May already had a joke on her lips, amused by her nephew's expression. When her eyes fell on the t-shirt in his hands, she had recognized the colorful uniform and logos on the shirts, and her face grew stern. Peter had caught the disappointment on his aunt's face and quickly walked after her with the bundle of clothes still in his arms, trying to explain himself while his arms and t-shirt were soaking wet. Peter, this is not just a matter of whether you're working part-time. Baby, that dog isn't ours. You cannot spend hundreds of dollars for an animal that lives in a shelter. May regrets her choice of words when Peter's jaw tightens. The teenager takes a step towards her, voice quiet but firm. They're going to euthanize her, May. The shelter cannot afford the procedure. They have a limit on how much money they can spend per animal. May puts her hands on her nephew's shoulders. She pauses for a moment before continuing in a softer voice. Peter, sweetheart, it's incredibly noble of you to want to help this dog, but that's not your job. You are not responsible. The shelter must provide and care for the animals. It can't be the job of a 15-year-old to contribute several $100s to get one of their dogs the medical treatment it needs. He steps back and shakes her hands off. Peter wants to punch the wall in frustration. The whole situation is driving him mad, and he feels so helpless. With every new word, Peter feels more and more how the ground under him breaks away when it becomes clear that May won't budge. How could he explain that this isn't some random dog? This is about Lucy. Lucy, who had belonged to Jeff, with whom he had shared a few hot dogs and several fond memories just weeks ago. Jeff, who had died because Spiderman thought it was a good idea not to get involved once the Avengers came into play. But how is he supposed to explain this to May? Aunt May, please. Can't you just trust me on this? Peter, how am I supposed to trust you if you take on several jobs behind my back, sneak out at night, and use a fake ID? It's like you're living double life. I hope for your own good that Ned has nothing to do with that fake ID. Peter looked down in shame at these words. Peter, calls May out. Not believing Peter pulled his friend into this mess, she sighs. At times like these, May wishes Ben was here. She doesn't like to admit it, but glancing at her nephew, standing crestfallen in the dimly lit hallway, she feels out of her depth. Why didn't you ask me before if you could work? Because you don't understand. Because you would have said no. The words were on the tip of his tongue, but Peter was careful not to say them out loud. He hated being in conflict with May, but there was no way he could explain to her that he was responsible for the dog without mentioning Spider-Man. The wet clothes fell to the floor with a slapping sound. Peter takes May's hands in his own and holds them tightly. He looks up at her, his tone pleading. Just let me go on for 2 more weeks. Please, Aunt May. May squeezes his hands gently. Her thumb rubs the back of his hand. Attempting to offer comfort, it hurt her deeply to see her nephew so upset. But how could she let Peter go on like this? It would be irresponsible. I'm sorry, Peter, but I can't do that. You did whatever came to your mind without thinking of the consequences, and although all of it was with good intentions, this isn't how it works. I'm sorry, but you will quit those jobs. May's eyes softened as she saw the moisture glistening in Peter's. She opened her mouth, but Peter had already bent down, picked up the soaking shirts, and disappeared into his room. May looks after him, about to call his name, but turns around as the door locks click. She goes to the bathroom to take something to counter the headache. It was going to be a long evening. Peter quietly closes the door behind him. For a moment he stands motionless in his room. His chest aches as he takes a deep breath, wondering why breathing alone hurts. Peter rubs over his sternum. He can't remember hurting himself while patrolling, but even if he had, it was pointless looking after it. It would heal in the next few hours. Silently, the boy leans against the door. His legs give way beneath him, and he sinks into the ground as if in a slow motion. Empty-headed, Peter looks down at the uniforms in his lap, and his lip trembles again as he pushes them aside and off of him. With a shaky breath, he pulls his knees to his chest and presses the heel of his hands against his eyes. He can hear May pulling back the chair in the kitchen. The beeping noise of a phone not being picked up follows as she waits for someone to take the call. When a voice answers, Peter stops listening and stares at the wall instead. His face grows hot. Peter starts biting the inside of his cheeks, his fingers clawing into the fabric of his pants. I'm so sorry, the boy whispers into the dark room in a choked voice. With a quiet sob, Peter buries his face in his knees. The teen's shoulders shake as a wave of guilt washes over him. He can hear May wishing someone a good evening, and at that point, the tears run freely down his cheeks. He had failed. None of this would have happened if he hadn't been such a coward. All because he is such a scaredy cat. He didn't know how he had attracted Iron Man's attention. What Peter did know is how it feels to have his heart leap out of his chest in fear of someone finding out about Spider-Man, when Tony Stark started showing up during his patrols. Peter had always given the Avengers a wide berth. Even though he wanted to help, he wouldn't dare to butt into their business. The Avengers are a close-knit team that can manage without the help of a small-town hero like him. He's a vigilante doing small stuff for the little man. Peter is proud of his work as Spider-Man, but with his self-made and obviously patched suit, he blushed at the mere thought of one of the Avengers seeing him like this. It was one of the reasons why, when he saw the Venus flytrap that was being held in place by the Avengers, which was as tall as a house and moved at a supernatural speed by plant standards, he turned 180 degrees on a roof, speeding off in the other direction. He had been happy with keeping it simple that night. Spider-Man prevented some muggings and caught the drivers of 2 vehicles taking part in an illegal car race through downtown Manhattan. It took until the next day for Peter to get a view of what his choice the night prior had resulted in. He had sat at the dining table, his smartphone propped up by a cup of milk, and watching the news while inhaling some cereal. The spoon fell out of his hand with a clatter, landing on the floor. But Peter had only eyes for the tiny screen and the picture of a destroyed building. He gapes at the destroyed homeless shelter, the one that he had met Jeff in front of more times than he could count. May hadn't been there and hadn't noticed his nephew struggling to breathe as a horrible foreboding washed over him. At the sight of an ambulance, while the news anchor talked about the death of an occupant of the shelter and an injured animal. I'm sorry, Lucy, whispered the team, still leaned against his bedroom door. Peter's eyes are squeezed shut, but the tears won't stop flowing despite how often he wipes them away. The detergent stung his nose, and Peter knew he should wash his face and arms. But he couldn't bring himself to care and get up. Just because he didn't want to deal with the Avengers, Jeff was dead. Because of him, Lucy had lost her owner and the ability to walk. Because of his mouthing off of Tony Stark, Lucy might not be there at the end of the month. At the thought of the injured malnoised mix, and the money he still misses to provide her help, another sob runs through the boy, shaking his entire body. Peter bites his knuckles to stifle the sound. The last thing he wanted was for May to hear him and come to his room and see him like this. Even if she was angry, she would comfort him. Peter didn't want that. He didn't deserve any consolation. Present. The barking and whimpering of dogs around them grew louder as Diana and her guest approached the floor with Lucy's kennel. Without stopping petting Lucy, Peter pulled his hoodie over his head. He stares down as he feels eyes on him, having picked up on the fact of the visitor that Diana is showing around watching him, his spider senses prickling. Whoever it was, Peter wished for them as he glanced down at Lucy's relaxed face that the dog would never meet Spider-Man or Peter Parker, because both of them mean bad luck. Alright guys, that is the end of chapter 10 of I Didn't Ask to Die by Anita Supervision. Hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.